Alright, let's see what kind of markers we're going to be using on this project. Of course, Venom's black, so we're going to be using a black marker, but this certain brand is kind of worn because I use this one a lot. It's Touch Twin markers. They're very good quality, but they are cheaper than most of your top brands, but they are definitely a competitor when it comes to markers. You got your brush tip and your chisel tip, of course. I don't use the chisel tip nearly as much, because with the brush tip you can get much better blending out of it, and I do a lot of blending. And of course I'll be using my cool grays. They're kind of a gray that has a bit of a blue tint to them. I've got a few of those here. Here's another one. Alright, those are my cool grays. I'm also going to be using my neutral grays around his skin areas where it's going to be lighter. I'll also be using this on the gums and whatnot. But around the skin areas, mostly I'll be using the cool grays. Except for around maybe where his logo is on his chest. And then, of course, we've got the skin tones. I've got a dark skin tone I'll be using, because I always like to show a little bit of skin when it comes to Venom. I feel like it brings a new element to it, humanizes him a bit. And then I got an extremely light one. The darker ones are going to actually help me do some shading on it. And of course there's Venom's mouth. A lot of people go with red, but I like to go with pink. That's the way I remember him. I'll be using some of that for his mouth and some of this. Now I always lay down my colors on my artwork before I lay down my line work. But for my line work I'll be using one of these right here. It's going to be a 01 micron pen. It's a fine liner pen, which is very good for hatching. Hatching's like my favorite kind of shading. I don't know why. That's what I generally do on just about everything. But yeah, those are the supplies that I will be using. So, let's get to it. Alright, starting off, I like to start off with shapes to get the general idea of the direction I'm going with the piece. Then I like to give it a solid outline, as you see here, as I'm working on the eye and kind of giving it a little bit of shape to the piece. And then soon we're going to be moving on to working on a bit of color once we get these shapes in here. And the time has finally come for us to throw on some color. We're going to start off with some cool grays, because Venom's always had that bluish tint to his lighting areas. But in the end, we're going to go with a pretty solid black on the majority of the piece, because Venom's always been like mostly black, but on his lighting areas, it's always been kind of a cool gray color. And then I use actually two different colors of skin tones around the eye to kind of use one darker skin tone for the shading. And I used pink for the gums, because every time I think of Venom, a lot of people like to use red, but I've always like pictured him as pink gums. I don't know why. I guess the humanity of it all. I don't know. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and do some line work on here. As you see, I colored in the eye and everything. But the line work in the end gives it a solid look. But it's always best to put down your color before you do your line work. As you see, I'm doing some touch-up work with my colors right now, and sometimes that has to be done. Finish up that tongue, put on some neutral grays on that with those Copics I showed you earlier. Now we're going to work on the body a little bit. I paused there for a minute because I was trying to decide if I was going to include part of his logo that's on his chest in there. And I did, and it actually came out pretty good. Now we're going to use some line work to do some shading called hatching. And it actually helps bring a little bit more depth to the piece and a little bit more detail. Alright, well that does it for this piece. If you guys will, please leave a comment. Let me know what you think. If you comment and you subscribe and you like the video, you can be entered to win it. Good luck!